All right, everybody, welcome aboard. It's so good to have you with us. Hope life is treating you well. We're a couple of weeks out from the NFL draft. We're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs 2019, the offensive line. It's not a finished product. Brett Veach and Andy Reid will have more things that they want to do to it in the draft, going all the way through the summer, and even during the season, you always have to deal with injuries and talent issues and things of that nature. So it's not a finished product. I know we're midstream, but it's just a great time here before the draft gets started to take a look at what the Chiefs have on the offensive line. I'm going to step aside for a second. You can take a look at the board while I'm talking. I want to blather for just a moment about just how important it is to have a good offensive line in today's NFL. And the short answer is this. It's very important to have at least a solid, middle of the pack, slightly above average offensive line that doesn't have a whole lot of soft areas. This cannot be the weakness of your football team. On the flip side, it's not as important anymore to have a top 5 or top 10 offensive line like it used to be in the 1960s with the Packers, in the 1970s with the Raiders and the Dolphins and the Vikings and the Steelers and everybody else like that. Even in the 80s and 90s, it was still very important to have a top-notch offensive line. We saw that with the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers. It was still very important to have a top 5 or a top 8 offensive line because teams ran the football so much, and because a lot of quarterbacks in that time, not all of them, but most of the quarterbacks back in those decades were rather stationary. Not a lot of them were mobile. Not a lot of them like to roll out of the pocket and do a lot of different things. They like to stand in that pocket and throw the ball. Today's quarterbacks tend, on average, to be more mobile. They don't mind running for first downs. They don't mind rolling out of the pocket. They don't mind doing all kinds of things that it takes to scheme for an offensive line that may not be top 5 or top 10. Today's NFL teams just don't run the football as much anymore. You see a lot of teams just go into the short passing game to kind of sort of replace that running game. So it is not as important as it used to be to have that top 5, top 8 offensive line, but the offensive line cannot be the weak spot of your team. If it is, it's going to hinder the rest of the offense, and that's going to hinder your entire team. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, and if Tyreek Hill comes back this season, you can expect to have another Ferrari on offense. It could be the best offense in football this upcoming season. Even if Tyreek Hill for some reason doesn't come back, and there's all kinds of issues with that, even if he doesn't come back this upcoming season, you're still going to have a top 10 offense this year. It's still going to be very good offense because you've got Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, Pat Mahomes, and a couple of other weapons, Travis Kelce, and etc. in there. So you're still going to have a very good offense no matter what. You want to make sure, and the Chiefs have done this so far, you want to make sure that the offensive line doesn't get any worse and become a weak spot for the team. Right now, your solid offensive line, we're going to take a look at that. I want to start with Mitchell Schwartz right here. He's your right tackle. You are getting a spectacular deal on Mitchell Schwartz right now. He is one of the best deals in the NFL in terms of offensive linemen who have moved off that rookie contract and have actually signed up for another deal. He's only making $8 million this season. So yeah, you're paying him something, but if he were to hit free agency, he'd be making a lot more money than that. So you're getting a great deal. I graded him as a tier 2 player. I went back and forth. For those of you who think that he's an elite guy and you want to give him a tier 1 grade, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. He is no doubt among the best in the league at his position. I wouldn't call him the best by any stretch, but he's in the mix. He's up there with those top players for the best tackles in the league right now. The reason I don't give him a tier 1 grade is simply this. The NFL is kind of in a weird spot right now with tackles across the board. Ever since Joe Thomas, his last couple of seasons, started regressing just a little bit and started having to deal with injuries a little bit, and since Joe Thomas retired, we don't have anybody right now in the NFL who is what you would call an absolute elite, lockdown, surefire Hall of Fame left tackle who is playing at that level right now. Tyron Smith is still in the NFL, but he's a couple of seasons past that kind of peak production. Andrew Whitworth, very good as well. If at some point you think he was an absolute lockdown, he is not that anymore. David Bakhtiari is very good. We've got some other guys in the league who are very good right now, but nobody right now at this point in time. You've got some guys who are coming up and trying to push for that. Nobody in the league right now is really approaching that Orlando Pace kind of a play, Walter Jones kind of a play, Anthony Munoz kind of a play, Bob Parker kind of a play. I mean, the list just goes on and on. The NFL is kind of in a weird time where some of the guys who could be that good in the future aren't quite that good yet, and some of the guys who have been that good in the past have kind of taken a couple of steps off that. So that elite level of player at the tackle spot just isn't there right now. So it's kind of like in the draft when you talk about the linebacker position being a little down in one season, or the quarterback position as a group being a little higher than usual. Right now in the NFL, the tackle position is a little bit down. It's very, very deep. There are a lot of good tackles in the NFL right now, but that peak is just not as high as it has been, say, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, or definitely 10 or 12 years ago. So that's why I give Mitchell Schwartz a Tier 2 grade for those of you who care about whether or not he's a Tier 1 or Tier 2. Suffice it to say, he is really good at what he does, and at $8 million a season for a cap hit this year, you are getting a great deal off of Mitchell Schwartz. When you move over to the other tackle spot, you have Eric Fisher. Now, Eric Fisher, I give him a Tier 3 grade, meaning simply this, for those of you who haven't heard my little grade methods. He is a very solid starter. He's not great. He's not going to make a lot of All-Pro or Pro Bowl appearances. He's going to make them occasionally, but also nobody's going to take that starting spot away from him as long as he continues producing the way he has. He's a very solid starting left tackle. You're thankful to have him. You don't have to worry about that spot. It's not a weak spot on your team. It's also not a strength of your team. It's just a very solid kind of a bring your lunch pail kind of a production there. $13.7 million. That's on the high end. You're not getting a good deal off of Eric Fisher, but you got to pay a left tackle if you're going to be very good in the the NFL at this league. You got to play somebody there. At $13.7 million, you're not getting a great deal like you are from Schwartz. But at $13.7 million, at least you know you have that position taken care of. You have both tackle spots taken care of. Generally in the NFL, they're the more important spots in the offensive line. You guys already know that. So you're solid right here at left tackle, even though you're not necessarily getting a great deal. You are really good right here at right tackle, and you're getting a great deal. You then move right here to right guard with Dr. LDT, who was injured most of last season. He is a very good starter. I've got him graded as a 3. You don't have to worry about anybody taking the starting spot from him. You can count on him as long as he's not injured. You can count on him to produce. He's not going to be a weak spot. He's not going to be dominant. He's not going to dominate anybody across the line from him, but he's very solid right there. He can hold his own. $8.3 million, not quite as good a value, not quite as good as deals what you're getting off Schwartz, but still, you're not having to pay a ton of money there for the production that you know you're going to get out of Dr. Laurent right there at right guard. So those are your 3 strong spots. Schwartz, LDT, and Fisher. You know you can count on those guys to produce. And man, those are just great building blocks for a solid offensive line. This is not a dominant offensive line. They're not going to push anybody around. They are not going to wow or impress anybody, but they're very solid, and they're going to bring it every single game. Just very solid, very consistent. Here's where we start to have question marks. You've got Austin Reeder at center. We haven't seen a lot of him, but we've seen a little bit of him on the football field, and what we have seen has looked solid. Of course, you had Mitch Morse there last year. Let him go in free agency. There was just no way that the Chiefs were going to hand him the kind of money that he made in free agency. Might not even be willing to pay him half of what he made in free agency. But you've got Austin Reeder, who has started a couple of games. He played out on 200, 250 snaps last year. When he's played, and we haven't seen a lot of him, but when he's played, he has looked solid. The fact that the Kansas City Chiefs haven't really done anything to fill that spot other than have Austin Reeder there makes you feel like they feel pretty good about him being right there at that starting spot. So I've got him as a Tier 4. He's a guy who hasn't shown yet that he can hold down a starting spot, but there's really no reason to think that he can't based on the production that we've seen so far and based on the fact that the Chiefs haven't done anything really to try to replace him at center. Also, they did give him a little bit of a contract extension, I think, a season ago, so his cap hit is $1.4 million. Very cheap right there. If you get anything at all out of Reeder this year, by anything at all, I mean if he's starting every game, And he's not a soft spot. He's kind of in there contributing and holding his own. You don't have to help him double team too often. He's not racking up a lot of penalties. He's not letting a lot of quarterback pressures get through to Patrick Mahomes. If he's kind of holding his own here, then you were getting a great, great deal right there at $1.4 million. I think Austin Reeder's going to be pretty good. I think the Chiefs feel like he's going to be pretty decent. I think they feel like he can hold his own. Here are where we have a lot more questions, and this is at the left guard spot. Most of the websites you look at, just about every one of them, every one I could find anyway, you guys can tell me if you find something different. Most of the websites you look at will have Cameron Erving starting right here at this left guard spot, which is what he did for a good part of last season. Wiley spent a good bit of last season over here at the right guard spot when Dr. Laurent was injured and left. I've personally got Wiley starting here at left guard spot, and I have two separate and I think very important reasons for doing that, but I just wanted to let you know why you're seeing something so different. Most of the websites you look at on the internet will have Cameron Erving starting right here at left guard. I don't, and here's why. Number one, Wiley on the field last year, Andrew Wiley played better, looked better than Cameron Erving. He looked moderately better at the pass blocking than Cameron Erving did last year. You can go back and look at the tape. He looked significantly, by leaps and bounds, better at run blocking last year than Cameron Erving did. In reality, and I need to talk about these two guys together, there is not a great deal of difference in talent between Wiley and Erving, but on the field last year, Andrew Wiley looked better. Somewhat better in the pass blocking, significantly better by a long shot in the run blocking. Cameron Erving, in all reality, when you watch Cameron Erving on the field, this was in Cleveland, this is again in Kansas City, Cameron Erving should probably not be a starter, or at least a long-term starter in the NFL. He's just not good enough at pass blocking or at run blocking yet at this point in his career. He's big, he's athletic. This is the second reason, this is his real value. This is why I wouldn't have Cameron Erving starting. He can play any position on the offensive line. He can play center, both the guard spots and both the tackle spots. And Andy Reid knew this when they signed him a couple of seasons ago. He's making $3.2 million. He's worth every penny. It's much better to think of Cameron Erving as kind of being the sixth man off your bench in the NBA. He can play every one of these positions. When you plug him into a starting spot, not only do you have a guy who really shouldn't be starting in the NFL. When you look at what he does, he didn't lead the league in penalties last year, but he was among the leaders in penalties in the NFL last year. He had trouble handling a lot of the twists and the stunts that teams presented him. He did occasionally need some help from double teams from other positions there on the interior. In addition, he did not hold up well in run blocking. He had a solid season. You're very thankful to have him. He's worth every penny. But his best value, Cameron Erving's best value, when you watch him on tape, is the fact that he can play any position. And that is when somebody gets injured, and inevitably somebody will, Cameron Erving can plug him right in and take over that spot immediately. Cameron Erving is the perfect guy to step in and start for a quarter or a half or 4 games. If a guy's out for four games, Cameron Erving is the perfect guy for that. He's not the kind of guy you want to plan to be your starter for the entire season. If Cameron Erving is the guy that you have starting for the entire season, it's an indication of what you have behind him in the offensive line depth chart, and that is pretty much absolutely nothing, okay? So Cameron Erving has a tremendous value. I would love to have him on my football team. Anybody would, but not as the starter. You can go back and you can look at the film, you can break it down, you can look at all the passing snaps, all the rushing snaps. Some of you say, well, listen, he started so much last year, and the Chiefs were still pretty good last year. Yeah, they were. They were absolutely good. But don't forget, you had Mitch Morse starting at center, and for a large part of the season, you even had Dr. Laurent there for, I think, the first 4 or 5 games. So it's just a different makeup than what you have this year. This year, it's better to have Cameron Erving coming in as the backup for any spot, and Andrew Wiley hopefully can settle down as the left guard. Now, Wiley came out of college as a tackle. They had planned for him to come in and be the backup as a tackle. Last year, he got thrown into the guard spot because somebody had to play that spot, and Wiley was the best of the backup offensive linemen to come in and do that. He played most of the year at right guard. He looked pretty good doing it. Not great, but he looked solid. And so I think this year your best bet is for Andrew Wiley to be right there. And of course, at $570,000, it's an absolute steal. No matter who you decide to put there, Wiley's going to make that. So if for some of you who want to put Irving there at left guard and put Wiley there as the backup, I'm not going to fuss about that. You're welcome to have that different opinion, but those are the reasons why I would have Irving there as the #1 backup and Wiley starting as the left guard. That's also the reason why you'll see some of the different things there on some of the other websites. Now, there is a huge break right here once you get past these top 6 guys. All of these guys have at least somewhat of NFL experience. We've at least seen them play some, and we at least kind of sort of like what we've seen out of Reeder and Wiley and even Irving as a backup stepping up and plugging in holes where he's just absolutely got to do it. There is a huge divide right here between these first 6 players and the next 6 players that you have on the roster. These numbers right here, this represents how many starts each player has. So when you look at Murphy and Hunter and Senior and Murray and Caroma, this is how many starts they've had in the NFL in their whole career. This number right here is how many snaps they played on the field in 2018. Now, I was not trying to be a smart aleck when I put this chart together and just throw a bunch of zeros up here and try to make these guys look bad. That's not the point of this. I really didn't realize until I started doing the homework that there were going to be this many zeros up on the board, but you have it right here. None of these guys, not Pace Murphy, not Justin Senior, Jimmy Murray, Ryan Hunter, none of these guys has ever started a single game in the NFL. To even further cap that off, we didn't see any of these guys even hit the field in 2018 for the Kansas City Chiefs or for anybody else for that matter. That's not necessarily unusual in the NFL. You have a lot of guys who simply aren't good enough to either start or even step in and be a part-time starter. When you see Cameron Irving getting this much playing time, and you ask why is he getting this much playing time, it's because the Chiefs didn't have a lot of depth behind him, and they still don't. Now, in the upcoming draft, I would really love to see the Kansas City Chiefs try to add some depth here for a couple of reasons. Not only because it would help them against injuries this year. You were kind of lucky last year. I know that doesn't feel like luck to have Dr. Laurent be injured last year, but a lot of NFL teams have multiple injuries at the offensive line spot, and their depth is really tested. You could very easily, and it's not unusual, to have 2 or 3 significant injuries to the Chiefs' offensive line this season. If that happens, your depth is really going to be tested. Now, the #1 thing that you can expect to see from the Kansas City Chiefs, they do it every season, every offseason, you're going to see them sign at least one guy who has some experience. He won't be great at anything, but he'll have some experience. He can just kind of step in and kind of plug a hole for a month or 2 if need be. You saw that a lot with Jeff Allen last offseason. I have no doubts you'll see that again at some point this offseason. Whenever they decide to move on somebody, they'll do that as well. What I would also like to see the Chiefs do is spend a couple of their draft picks on adding depth right here at offensive line. I don't necessarily want them to use their first-round draft pick on it unless there's just a guy sitting right there that they really like. But I really would love to see them just add some depth here at the offensive line with draft picks. The second reason I would really like to see them start to kind of develop the depth here, not only to fix this interior, but this depth as well. In either 2020 or 2021, you're going to see the Chiefs looking for ways to cut expenses. Why is that? That's because they're going to have to sign Patrick Mahomes to a whole heck of a lot of money. I'll have a video coming up in a few weeks about exactly how much money the Chiefs might be looking at paying Patrick Mahomes and how that contract might be structured. But for now, suffice it to say, the Chiefs are going to have to pay Patrick Mahomes a boatload of money. One Brinks truck will probably not be enough for Patrick Mahomes. They'll probably have to back up 2 Brinks trucks. With that in mind, either in 2020 or 21, whenever they decide to get that contract extension done, they are going to be looking for ways to cut expenses to save money. Right now, and this isn't a bad thing, this is just a statement of fact, they have quite a bit of money tied up in the offensive line. Right here you have 8, that's 16, and another 14 right there, that's $30 million tied up just in 3 players on the offensive line. If in this draft, and listen, this is what a good general manager is for. I've said this over and over again, a good general manager will not only look at this season, but he'll look at next season and the season after to try to make sure that your team is set up for future success as well as success this year. When you look at how much money is tied up right here, $30 million in just 3 players, that's not a bad number. That's kind of normal for NFL offensive lines. But if you're looking for ways to cut expenses, one of those ways is to already have some draft picks that you think can have some success in the NFL, already have them ready to take the place of Schwartz or LDT or possibly even Eric Fisher. That would be a big cap number to fix right there. So if you can find a left tackle somewhere in the draft this year or next year in the draft, that would really go a long ways towards saving some money right there, money that you're desperately going to need in order to sign Patrick Mahomes here either next offseason or the offseason after that. So that's why I would really love to see the Chiefs kind of start to invest some draft picks into that. If it's, listen, if it's 2 6th-round picks and a 7th-round pick and only one guy pans out, so be it, and he's average, that's fine. At least you've got something there to kind of bolster this offensive line. You have a very solid offensive line. Like I said before, it's not great, it's not bad, it's not weak, it's not soft, it's solid. I think you can expect good things from this offensive line, barring injuries. If you get 2 injuries on the offensive line this offseason, one of these guys is really going to play. Maybe one of these guys can play, we just haven't seen it yet. So for those of you who have heard Andy Reid say something about one of these guys, or you've heard Brett Veach in a presser talk about one of these players and how they really like them, that's all fine, but nobody has seen any of these players. Even McKenzie, and I put him up there because he was drafted last season. These 6 guys here, nobody has seen anything from them on an NFL field except for Andy Reid and Brett Veach on the practice field, and that is a practice field. That is not live NFL games. So maybe you've got somebody here that you really like, that you really think can step up, and maybe the Chiefs have been eyeballing that as well, and that's fine, but we just haven't seen that yet. Nobody's seen that. Nobody has any film on those guys in real live NFL games to be able to say that. So maybe one of these guys can step up, and if you're the Chiefs, that's the best case scenario. If one of these guys, maybe McKenzie, steps up and starts to take one of these spots, or maybe Wiley turns out to be even better than we thought he could be, or maybe Reader really turns out to really lock down that position. By the way, if Reader does turn out to lock down that position, you're going to have to pay him some money here in the next offseason or 2, but all that will take care of itself. If one of these guys does step up and start to play really well, that's fine. That's really beneficial for the Chiefs. We just haven't seen that yet. So the idea here is you've got a solid offensive line, not great, not a dominant one, a solid one that you hope patches together like it ought to. You hope you don't get any injuries so you don't get into any of this depth. We'll see what the Chiefs do here in the draft. We'll see what they do. They'll probably sign a free agent or 2 to try to kind of bolster this as well. But those are the reasons why I would like to see them going ahead, moving farther in the NFL draft. All right, I think I've talked enough about the offensive line. I appreciate you guys listening. Hope you have a good one. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.